from then on, was talking about what kind of piece we wanted, and there was a little bit of this tendency, like it had to be music for dance.
Oh, I kept being told.
Yeah,
I kept being told it by the
this was what Joelle was being told all the time, and I kept telling her all the time.
Don't make it a piece of music. Don't make it a piece of music. Make
That's
it a piece of dance music. I don't have time to write pieces twice. I didn't want to write pieces.
And I pretty much wanted her to write something that could stand on its own. The way a lot of my choreography is choreography to music that I adore. And so I didn't really want just an accompaniment. And so that was a lot of our conversation. And then we got to work for about, I guess, 3 days where she was a lot reacting and we were having fun with different counterpoints from what we were doing. And I was in a situation where it was the first time I was working with points. Really the first time I was working with ballet dancers in their sort of ballet. They only really turn into ballet dancers when they do those whole things.
And the nature of the commission was.
And it was very much about point.
It was required.
And my point of view about the point is that what you do is you take women and first you pick women who have very high crotches, long legs and high crotches. Then you pick really sort of frail looking ones. Then you have them wear these skirts, those really short skirts, so that everybody can see their crotches. Then you open the legs really, really wide, as much as possible. And then you put them on these things. You also put these things to make their legs longer so their crotches even higher. And then you put them on these little things so they can't really stand up on their own and they need a man to hold on. So that's one. And then of course it's beautiful. But the beauty but that is definitely a part of it. So it definitely became about this sort of idealization of women that is not particularly functional in the long term. And so that was the origin, I guess.
That was your idea.
That was very much the origin of the piece was playing around with ballet, which meant playing around with these point shoes, which meant playing around with this sort of being perfectly together and completely decorated, which ended up sort of leading into this sort of idealization thing. And so the music became this sort of elegiac quality for this, and this anger. So we had this sort of sexual anger and this elegiac quality. So those were the things that we were both playing with. And then Joelle pretty much went away and wrote the piece. And then I came in and heard it and had some, mostly I just adored it, but then I had some reactions for a few places. And we just talked about it till we understood what we were talking about. One thing is that I think at the beginning we thought we were going to write a sparse piece of music. That was one of the things.
This is a sparse piece.
And this one there is a sparse piece of music.
You heard those long minutes when nothing happens but the soprano saxophone. I think it's not a big piece of music.
I don't know. To me, it has like
Moments
a lot of
when
density. So that was.
But it has the density is a psychological density.
Right. So anyway, we both I think were adjusting all the time. It was very, very exciting.
It was very interesting. I mean, they kept telling us that collaborations were like marriages. And this is like marriage counseling. We each have a different story.
So tell your story.
My version of it. I have a much more anecdotal version of it. My version of
She
it.
says we did it all in Hawaii.
Right. It was some other man. But my version of it is that there was a snowstorm and we were supposed to go to Carlisle. Instead of going in a regular way, everyone else said, oh, we'll never get there unless we take the train. And Colin and I rented a car. We didn't know we were going to be the people who worked together, but we had like these hours in the snow in which we talked about a lot of stuff, including stuff that eventually became the piece. But we were talking sort of randomly. We didn't know each other, and we didn't know each other's work. But there were a lot of sort of extra danceable and extra musical things that came up that were very sympathetic between us. Ideas both for work and sort of ideas that had to do with things that we were each reading and experiences in each of our lives, and sort of a general sense that kind of the sources that each of us worked from were very congruent. A strange sort of combination of following it. There's something very participatory and responsive about the way Colin choreographs his music. I also liked his choice of music. I saw him, a piece of it is a Schnitzel piece, to a Bartok piece, to Bach piece, to Purcell piece, all pieces that I had some sympathy with before. And I was very interested in how he did them, and I felt that they had a kind of knowledge of the music that I was very impressed by. A sensate knowledge of the music, a psychological knowledge of the music, as well as a technical. But then, what was interesting to me about the collaboration, there's several things. One is that at the beginning, when we were fooling around at Carlisle, the most primitive gestures, both musically and dancefully, wound up in the piece. We thought we were just sort of fooling around, but in fact, last night I was very touched in the dressing room. I kept thinking, wow, that was the first night, first afternoon. I remember when he did that with these like 12-year-old dancers who were falling off their shoes, and I remember when I played like 2 notes, and they were the dum-da-dum, and that that little sixth in the grace note is the origin of the whole piece. That long melody comes from it, and that triplet melody and so on. But so much of that was there at the beginning. Then, because Colin trusted me, and I believed that he was very musical, he permitted the next stage of the process to be my going away and basically writing the piece. And I came back and I wrote the piece, and what happened when I played him the piece, which he shortened, which I find the most interesting part of the process for me, and also the most helpful musically for me. My whole interest in writing, large part of my interest in writing music, has to do with the encapsulation, the sort of oral encapsulation of psychological landscapes. And what he said when he heard the piece, which was remarkable to me, because what he heard was me picking the piece out on a piano. And that piece is a very timbral piece. So I was very grateful that he was as musical as he was, because what he said was so incredibly true. He said the 3 angry places are too much the same. And it was absolutely true. But not only was it true, but I think that having very differentiated kinds of anger is a very hard thing for women in the culture. And so it was not a technically hard thing for me to look at, but just a hard thing to for me to look at types of anger I have, some of which I express and some of which I don't, and some of which I express only in dreams, and some of which I express only privately, and some of which are very safe people, and to put them into music and to connect them with the erotic in a way that was going to become a public forum. I think that's one of the things that was very different for me. The only dance work I had done before had been improvisational. And composition is very different for me from improvisation, because you have to sort of stand behind it. It's got to stay out there as you. You have to take ultimate responsibility for it. And so I had to take real responsibility for depicting and being that kind of angry person in 3 different ways. And I was very happy that I did it. What I found was that it changed the piece, of course, in a very good way. The shape of the piece stayed the same, but the precision of those 3 kinds of anger was very good for the piece, but it was also very good for me. It changed things in a subsequent piece I wrote, very different. The string quartet I wrote after this piece has very, very different kinds of relationships to terror and rage than other pieces of mine. And in addition, it changed some of my, the way that I like to talk out anger with people in my life. It was very, music is very tied up in my actual life for me. And so it was very useful. I think that kind of collaboration where someone sort of gets in your soul and says, well, try this part a little over. I think as both an artist and as a person, that's probably the most useful part of a collaboration for me. I'm delighted that we made a piece which I think is lovely. But in addition, I'm even more delighted that I really was able to let Colin, to trust him enough as an artist, as well as a person, to let him sort of pry places open that I was not doing as an artist before. The other thing that I liked very much about the collaboration, and I speak of this one essentially a very lonely thing that leads to an interpersonal experience, but you prepare it so in such a solitary way. And for me, the material that's interesting to work with is rather frightening sometimes. That to have like a partner in exploring that, or at least addressing it, was very, very comforting. Comforting is a funny word. It was bravening. It made me more brave, or at least more comfortable with the sort of going out on a limb.
Well, my work with tap dance and composers started in 1983, which is when I also started working with Gary. And the first piece I made was I wanted to find a composer who would write an entire piece for me and write every sound that I made, because I thought it would be a very good learning experience to make me more sophisticated musically, and I had to actually realize the score. So I found a composer to work with named Larry Polanski, and he wrote, it turned out to be a half-hour piece called 3 Monsoons, totally scored. It was before I had my floor, so it was just on the regular stage. And it, was a very slow process of learning the music and then trying to do it with my feet in interesting visual ways, and making so that piece was as interesting visually as it was already sounding.
He wrote all
Everything.
all of you.
I was totally scored, as well as it was for a percussionist. And it was in 3 sections, and it was a half-hour long. And it was really a long process, probably a year, because I'd get like 1 section at a time. And we didn't really even talk a lot. It was really, he wrote this score. He'd seen me dance. We talked on the phone. He was in California. I was in New York. I would just get scores, pages and pages in the mail. And so I finished choreographing this piece, and I needed a percussionist, and Gary, I used Gary. And he was the percussionist. He was on the side of the space. He had his score in front of him, playing his music, looking at the score. And here I am doing just as difficult musically as he's doing, very equal. And I had to memorize the entire piece. And I have people comment. They say, "Oh, you must have been improvising," because they couldn't believe that I could actually have to remember all this. And then sometimes I'd be like right next to Gary, and he's like looking at the score. He didn't even know I was standing right next to him. And I relate to him, and he didn't even know I was there. And so, really, our collaborations, which started in 1983, was a gradual move towards him starting to get into the idea that the movement that he makes while playing could be very interesting. When he started working, he had mostly played with new music ensembles and orchestras where you're not supposed to move a lot. You certainly don't think that much about movement. And so it was a very gradual transition for him to start thinking about, well, what's the movement that I'm making, and what should I exaggerate, and where should I look? It started by my convincing, or telling him he really had to memorize at least 1 section of the piece. different. There were certain parts of the piece where he actually scored my part. There were any parts that were interactive we made in the studio together. They were very time consuming. We'd make maybe two measures of 4 and 2 hours because we had to be interactive. I wanted it interesting visually. We wanted it to make sense musically. So it's very exciting and very time consuming. What else can I say? That's probably gives you the process of where our collaboration is going.
I'm sorry your significant other here is not.
Yeah, he has a day job, so
Yeah, you can tell
yeah,
me
he would have liked to have been here.
We have a chair for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, now that he's gotten so into movement, every time we perform the piece, new things happen. Like the last time we performed Take Off, which is the second section, someone forgot to set his stool. So the lights came on, he had to have a stool. So we ran backstage, he got the stool, and for the first time he did a slow movement with Rhonda and sat down together, and you know, his movement sense is just increasing. So, and I was in the audience, I wasn't performing. I thought, that's great, you know, we have to put this in. So his whole movement sense, every time we perform it, grows and grows and grows. It's very exciting.
Great. Tom and Chris,
Well, we started out wearing toe shoes. This concept of really long flashes. I've been kicking the drums with my toes. Chris was falling down all the time. That's where it all came from. That's all. Chris, I live in Minneapolis, and Chris moved to Minneapolis about 5 years ago. And I saw him perform at Walker Arts Center, and I said, I want to work with this guy. We have a dance studio in where I live, in our townhouse. We have a 24 by 30 foot dance studio on the floor. And Chris and his wife Kathy would come over and rehearse at our place, and he'd come down and I'd be playing music. He'd say to me 3 or 4 times over a period of time, a couple of years, we got to work together. So we finally did, and we got in the studio. And it's, I don't know what to say about the process, except it was more a process of trying to sync up rather than a process of cognition.
a lot of your pieces are improvisation, right?
It's all improvised. The structure that's set for it is pretty loose. And we can change that before we go out on stage. The lighting also, initially, we did this last year at the extended play series at the Minnesota Dance Alliance. Chris, maybe you can talk about that. Yeah, the whole thing is improvised. And I'm also a trained modern dancer. And so what I try to do is work with Chris on musically on realizing and maybe even directing a little bit sometimes what he's doing movement wise. I got a really bad cold, so I don't want to talk.
I did want to ask you, so you seem to be very specific about, those improvised, you seem to be very specific about instruments you needed.
Yep.
It's a big, long process of trying to get and find them.
Yeah, I spent 2 days looking for an orc instrument. It's about this big, and I have one in Minneapolis. And I thought, well, I got that thing here, and I couldn't find one. And it had a particular sound, this low kind of sound that fit the character that we kind of arrived at with Chris for an opening, and it also provided. I've been doing a lot of reading about kind of this anthropological stuff about the one. This guy, John Wilson, in Arizona, talks a lot about the one, and as a kind of a click track, or more of a sync track, like a video sync track. And that thing kind of provides this big, huge orc instrument that's got a low C marimba bar on it. Kind of provided me with that bass. And fortunately, Tigger had gomba. that was part of the thing for me too, is that the way Chris dances, there's a lot of surprises in the way he moves, and then part of it's in his facility. And I figured, well, if he's going to surprise me, then I'm going to surprise him. So, and not only that, but I have a kind of resistance to doing the same thing over and over again. So I think it was the third night I brought in my 3-year-old had one of those fake cellular phones.
Have a nice day.
And so I started that first section out with that thing. If you punch it right, you can get a nice rhythm going. Then I could do that with this thing about
See, I'm out on stage and Tom's going off, and I'm thinking, okay, just go with it. And then the first night, Angus Moss said, who was the lighting designer the first time, came up with, in the set for another piece that was in this program, there were these long pieces of bamboo that were hanging from the ceiling. And what Angus did was took the saw and sawed off about 3 different lengths of this bamboo and duct taped the pieces together and handed it to me and said, here, play this. And so I played that the first night. Chris hadn't heard that. You have to kind of go with the share. Oh, those are 15-gallon chemical barrels. You can get those at hotels, motels, and conference centers. Depending how fast you can run. Huh? You got to wash the bleach and the soap and the stuff out of it. You get a student to do that. We did a six 6 nights last spring, and we got it done.
We plugged it. I mean, we got together about a month ago. It's more, again, when we work, it's more a process of getting. There they are. And you know, they work the best with those big, huge knit. What do they call that? Mallets. Those big, huge mallets. And I actually, when I teach music for dance, I have some kids. They get a pretty nice sound out of it. And then Bill Buchan, I think some of you people know him up here in town, lives here in New York. He came last August to Minneapolis, and we did a thing at the Stanton Airfield, a little tiny town. David Means put this big site-specific thing together. And we tried trying to get different pitches out of it, like cutting sections out of it. And it worked. The only trouble is if you go up too high, then the legs are unstable and it falls over. But the process for Chris and I to get together is more about kind of getting these 2 sync tracks together and talking about them. And just playing music. It all seems to come together when the music starts.
How do you know when it's finished?
Well,
I suspect.
we had talked about that. It's a lot easier to do it when we are working with the lighting designer who is improvising. Last night we were done before the lighting cue, and so I just kept, trying to signal the lighting person, okay, it's over, and then, it's over, it's over. I picked up my coat and started walking
do with when Chris is tired. It really does.
Okay. Dan, sorry your significant other is here.
It's okay. Yeah, David's in Pittsburgh today. For me, I also have a cold. David and I made porn about 4.5 years ago, premiered it at Columbia College in Chicago. And we came together because we were both aware of each other's work, and David was commissioning a score for me, and he had already made a saxophone duet previous to this one, but it was really, they picked up the saxophone, played a couple of remedial licks, and then danced for 10 minutes. And when he mentioned it to me, I said, okay, but I want to make a duet that is not dance, is not music, and is both. And that was the beginning of it, and we talked for a while, and the issues that we wanted to grapple with had to deal with masculinity and the foibles of masculinity and the taboos of masculinity, or against masculinity that we're feeling. And it became clear very soon into our process that this piece was also going to be about our relationship. And so the relationship and the making of the work had a very sympathetic kind of development, because we were just getting to know each other and each other's work, and the work was developing, and as the work developed, we got to know each other and love each other, and so on and so forth. I'd say we threw out at least 90% of the material that we made, and we had a great time making the material. We had tons of material. We thought, no problem, we're going to have a piece. We just kept making material and making material and making material, and 3 days before opening night, oh my God, we have no piece. And so snip, snip, cut, 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 snip, 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 slash, and still there was no piece. Dress rehearsal, we kind of got something together. Opening night, we walked out of the dressing room like this. And lo and behold, somehow we had a piece that I think when it opened in 1990, it was about 10, 12 minutes long. And I think now in its present incarnation, it's maybe 16. And that's a big difference. And people come up to us and tell us, oh, you really changed Horn around. You really worked on it. I really loved what you did. And we have no idea of what they're talking about. But it must be true. And so I think that as our relationship has deepened, the piece has changed, and you're not conscious of your relationship deepening with a friend necessarily. So in the same way, we're not necessarily conscious of the piece changing. Really, as far as we're concerned, we're doing what we did that night at Columbia College. At any rate, this got us to thinking after about 3.5 years. Well, if the quality of this piece is so related to our relationship, maybe college, we were not making a funny piece. And when people laughed, we were very upset. And, since then, if they don't laugh, we're very upset. But we're very satisfied if there's very little laughter because we enjoy being together on stage, but what we're doing, we're not trying to be funny. We're really going through what we're going through on stage, and there was no intent on our part to make a comedy. It's great that that people can relate to what we're doing through humor. Perfectly happy about that. Happy about all sorts of different ways that people can relate to it as well. And usually by the end, and I think it happened to some degree last night, it flips for people, and there's a kind of emotional part of it that really comes through in the end. Yeah, it was. We certainly have not had that vocal an audience. I don't think ever. And we performed these hundreds of times. So that was really interesting.
Okay. What's extraordinary about these courses is the intensity of relationships here, of the working relationships. So I'm going to ask the obvious question, and just now we're not going to go in order or anything like that. What's the worst thing about all this? I mean, it sounds very good when you're describing it, but obviously there's the really hard stuff. And maybe there isn't much. Maybe there isn't much of that. Maybe for you guys it's been pretty much such positive things. I'm talking about the whole process of getting out of doing what we do. And I'd like to just comment for a minute on the downside of this all. Is there a downside?
It's a practical downside, which is very time consuming. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do. And the Carlisle project gave us a lot of opportunity. It's like we've thrown together with the right tools. But it would be almost impossible to provide that for yourself unless you had a dance
Now, were
company.
you paid and somehow
We
Carlisle
were
was?
paid, and they paid dancers to just be there for us to work on and provided pianos. They really did it a good way.
But I think as a composer, you get such a different sense of time because of the score. You write a score and it goes out to an orchestra or someplace and they read it down in 3 days, 2 days. In the dance world, it's a whole different context. And to us, this is like, wow, so much time.
geographical location. I believe it's, Tracy will be able to talk about this afternoon, I'm sure. But I think it's American composers and choreographers working with composers and choreographers from South America and Far East and the Middle East, and maybe Africa. So they're working real hard. The other thing about Meet the Composer, of course, is the great composer performance
And I did, and he let me, and we had a small grant for me to compose it, it was Haley 2. And it totally didn't work. And he didn't even see it. And he's a major creative. I mean, you would all know his name, but it doesn't matter. He just didn't have time for it. He's amazing. I put it together, I thought it worked. When it got on the stage with the audience and brilliant young dancers, it just didn't get off the ground. And that was because there was no interaction. And it's my, I mean, it's not my fault. It was my choice to work with a great composer who had no time to work. So I take responsibility for the fact that it didn't work. And he probably could have arranged it to work, but he was in touch. So the ones that don't work were not on that concert. And the ones that don't work were not real collaborations.
Other experiences other than
Well, yeah, I'm just giving up on my own particular piece. And the reason I'm backing out of that one is because I feel like what's required of me, what I've now been told is required of me, is exactly antithetical to what I do.
in this piece you
In the piece I'm now not writing.
no.
I was told by the person that I was supposed to be working with, and these are the words: don't make me feel anything. I'll just manipulate the audience. And it's just, I won't do that. I mean, you know, I wanted to make Colin feel things, and I wanted his work to make me feel things and make things happen. You know, it's not interesting to me to collaborate as sort of like an easel. You know, just, you know, I'm standing there and they get to paint stuff on me. It's like not my thing. So. Hmm? It's not a piece you're going to see.
Not with your name on it.
Not with my name on it, right.
There's going to be a lot of nameless people in this part of the conversation.
Yes.
Other stories.
Well, this experience working with Chris was probably the most enjoyable. It was the most enjoyable kind of collaboration that I've had with him. The ones that have been less enjoyable have been the ones where I feel like the music I'm doing is Band-Aid sort of work, where I'm asked to fill in the blanks, you know, with something. I did a piece, a tape piece, collage piece, where choreographer would hand me periodic videotapes, and I would actually sit there with a timer and fill in the blanks, you know, and that it was grueling, and also I think musically for me it was unsatisfying because I couldn't take it where I wanted to go with it, and we weren't kind of talking the same language. So, I don't know what to say. It was more of a pulling, push-pull kind of situation, kind of going together.
I've probably worked with about 8 different composers because every piece I make is collaborating with a composer. And some of them have just been more of a struggle. But I think they've all worked and we've always pushed each other, like everyone else was saying. That's been the best part. We've always pushed each other to go further in a different direction because we're coming from different directions. But more like some of the other people were. And then I have the music and I, more traditionally choreograph it to the music. But it was fun to do it that way. I hadn't actually done it that way, the normal way of choreographing to the music. So that's how I just composed it to push me somewhere.
I think in my first experience with this, two things I've noticed that are very important are that the choreographer and musician have the opposite talent or the opposite passion for the opposite field. Kathy has a tremendous sense of musical. She's got a terrific ear, and when she made the cuts for this thing last night, it really worked. I mean, musically, except for one place where But the other more important thing is what Dan was saying about creating your piece together is the critical ability, where you also, in the passion for creating the best thing possible, the criticism level was very high. And I think that's the bottom line, because you can have a lot of passion, but and I guess in the collaboration, you have to be able to be very critical together. The opposite.
You said you thought a lot together at the early stage of what you were going to do, or
Well, we just started getting to know each other. First of all, it's very weird.
We drank a lot.
You had to get through those levels. And I had to learn to fight.
I taught her to fight.
But I think that the level of criticism is very, very important. Because, the time element, if you have enough time to see the path worked out, it allows for that kind of upgrading.
I was just going to say, it's funny, David and I did another project about a year and a half after we made Born. It was a big project. And I was working with 5 musicians. He was working with his dance company. And it was supposed to be a collaboration. And I was writing the music and he was making the choreography. We had a hell of a time. It was a nightmare. And I mean, it certainly added another dimension to our relationship, and we also learned to fight. I think the problem was, in part, that I really wanted something to say about the physical action that went on stage, including what the musicians physically did. And David wanted a lot to say about what happened in the music. And we were constantly trying to find our roles, and it was really, really tough because it really wasn't a collaboration. It really, I mean, in the end, was a commissioned work. And it took us a long time, kind of conceptually and emotionally, to understand that.
yeah, there's a traditional way of working. It's very seldom does a musician get to
going, and talking in any way in musical terms. It was me saying, this is what I'm hearing as an emotional reaction to what you're playing. So I was never involved in, I think in a way I was involved in saying where I felt there were problems and what those problems were, what they meant to me. And we were very interactive in terms of that. Because I think you
But I
also helped me a
think
lot that
also-
way in terms of problems, but then the solutions, it was very much that you then become the solution, I became the problem. So it was half of it was very interactive and half of it was
But I think that's also why this collaboration works, is because both of us are going for a sort of elegant, eloquent psychological presentation from, and so it doesn't matter to me or to you, like how many PAs there are, how many timpani hits there are, but it matters whether it does this thing at a particular time, psychological, I don't know, a dramatic thing at a particular time, and that's the language that we really spoke with together, yeah.
Well, I'd just say that for me, the sort of baseline of any collaborative process is first, I need to respect the person, and I need to feel their respect for me. So that once we have that, then even though that person may not be fluent exactly in my medium, I will trust them if they say something about their response to what I'm doing, and vice versa. That ultimately we have to have that respect, and then from that you can respect somebody and not trust them. And the next level is I have to build trust. I have to trust the process of our communication, and from that there's an unfolding that happens where it's neither me nor my collaborator, but it's something else. It's us. And when that happens, it becomes magical. There's sort of it's like I come outside of my world and my bubble, and my collaborator does the same thing, and that's when it starts to really grow. But if I don't have the trust that by doing that they're not going to respond or respect me, I won't do it. I will pull back, and so we sort of stay in our own camps, and it's sort of patched together. But when it really works, you feel the communication. And I felt in all the pieces last night, you could see that the artists were really working with each other, with each other's psyches and emotions, and that's at that point. It doesn't matter what we're doing. It doesn't matter what notes we're playing or what movements we're doing, because that's the power of that comes through to the audience, and it's no longer about let me show you what I can do. It's about who we are being together.
I think part of it for me too is like this Buddhist thing about attachment. If I get too precious about what I'm doing, and I can't let go of that, whatever it might be, it's like there's suffering. I don't know how else to put it. It's like, so if I get too precious about it, I also choreograph too. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out, I'm working with this vision when I'm a certain kind of image of something that I want on stage, and if the music isn't there to bolster or to make it happen, complete the image, then it's not right. So I'm kind of struggling with that myself too. But if I get too precious about it, there's problems for me.
But just one last thing. What? Oh, okay.
First of all, I love the way the orchestration, the use of all the solo instruments, they get this wonderful solo gliding through. And we talked about the choice of timbre. Did the choreographer ever say, oh, this shouldn't be this, although this should be the violin, or
Yeah.
you didn't get that?
When that sense, we talked about the kind of timbre we wanted at the
I
beginning.
was so
A lot
scared
of
what was
stuff
going to
at the
happen in
beginning
that
we talked
saxophone solo. I kept saying, don't make them move too much. Are they really going to move around a lot? Maybe we could just have them walk away. Maybe we get an empty stage. Maybe we could just have them
They'd be
sort
on their knees.
right. And I love what he did there. I mean, I would never, see, that's the thing, is like, even though I could imagine some things, I'm not a choreographer. I could never imagine anything as beautiful as what Colin did here, and as appropriate for what I was saying musically. I was thrilled.
Well, I think that is also the thing that in the end, it's the trust and the respect for the other. What it also ends up, and very much through the work itself, I just love music that really affects me, and I don't use that term loosely. I mean, it's really something that offers me a world that is a whole world in which I can feel, a full human being in, and the choreography is a way that I do that. So however it's worked out, I think then, however much you control the need in certain ways, that then becomes the logistics between the other people. But it really does go, I think it has to go that far for it to really work.
I just, again, got to wrap in very, very short time.
gave me a much clearer sense of what I was going to be doing with the piece, although I didn't know it at the time. I figured that out about, I got to go in many wrong directions, but I think that was a very, very definitive moment for me. And the other was really quite close to the beginning, because a lot of times I'm working with music. I enjoy choreographing, using music and then choreographing. And what I found was that I can get very close to the music. I can much too close sometimes. And so for me, what was very wonderful was that we started out in counterpoint. And I think we stayed that. There were very few places where we're actually directly working together. And that was, I remember the first day when she was actually laying out some motifs. And it was very much, they met somewhere, but they met so far away. And it was the distance of the communication between the two was very, very exciting to me. Gave me a lot more sense that I could start to take more of those kind of risks.
I think that there's a tension in the way they relate to each other that isn't an opposing tension, but is sort of a floating against each other. I think the two most important things to me, which are completely unrelated, one is exactly the moment that Colin was talking about, the one I talked about the anger with me. It's very, very important to me as a solitary composer. He really changed a lot of things in my persona and in my music, and I'm very grateful for that. The other thing is the thing that happened with the performers. I mean, this is the fifth time we've seen this piece performed. We've seen it before the Philadelphia, we've seen it before the Hartford, and now we've seen it before here. The saxophone player and the conductor have followed this piece all over. And the Hartford people, with the exception of one dancer and one player, followed this piece to New York. I mean, there was such commitment to the piece on the part of the dancers and the players. I occasionally have that experience with like a string quartet or singer doing work for my but not like a company of people who were almost randomly shifted together at the beginning and became like the last night in Hartford. I mean, the musicians were crying in the pit. It was an extraordinary thing. I have not seen performers play together like that, so that like yesterday they had like one rehearsal for this performance. And the bass player was a new player, he was enveloped in it, like in a family. It was extraordinary to me. The kind of musical esprit de corps was just extraordinary. And that I have not really seen that before because of the way music is economically structured in this country. I don't see that often.
I think in general, what's been most satisfying is the process again, going, struggling through things you can never get through and making breakthroughs and finding ways to communicate through mediums and dealing with the art form with someone is such a tight. Everything about the process has been the most satisfying.
The coming together of music and dance has created a new friendship for me that's going to last a lifetime. There's nothing you can do about it. That's what's so beautiful.
For me, the sort of high points have been on stage where I have felt energetically almost possessed, and to feel my energy be really resonating out like sound waves rippling away from me, and then to pull it in with the kind of in a synchronized way, but without knowing that we were going to do that. To hit that moment is an incredible feeling. It's just like my body is going to explode when that happens. And the closest thing I can think of when watching other people is when James Brown does that, and that power when he hits the downbeat together with the horns. That's what I feel, and I felt that periodically. It's incredible.
Performing horn at Vassar College about 2.5 years ago, about a third of the way into it, I tore my lateral collateral ligament in my right leg. A white sheet of pain came down and stayed there. I didn't have room in my mind for anything but one thought, and that was stay with
I'm sort of finishing your sentence.
Yeah, Saul is the guy who organized most all of this, and
Yay!
What I'm sure you'd all like to move your legs a little bit. If you head towards the entranceway to the school, there's a sort of corridor with black and white checkerboard tiles. We refer to it here as black and white. And there's coffee service there, but I think we should, well, maybe that would be the best thing to do immediately. Is that all right, Bill?
Yeah.
There's a coffee service and some bagels and snacks that are available. And what I'd like everyone to do after you get some refreshments, if you'll head into the large dance studio immediately next door to it, which we call the Great Hall, that's where we'll gather for our next activity.
Yeah, so we can turn on to that pretty quickly here.
Yeah, the interlude will be in the Great Hall.
Interlude will be in the Great Hall. We all know stuff what she's done, but would you mind when David Brisket, conductor for Karen Hawkins, is going to introduce her, talk to her, and our whole, we want to hear from her, and we want to honor her for this unbelievable kind of thing she's done for the field of music and dance. So this is David Briskin. I'm going to ask him to introduce and to interview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say that I've never had such a loving response in my life. So the two guys are very special. I've never had such a loving response.
You'll forgive me if I talk about it in front of you for a minute? Is that
I can do all
Is that okay? Just a very,
This is going to be very, high quality.
a very brief introduction of Lucia Lubashevsky. Lucia is, as we know, best known for her 40 years of collaboration with Eric Hawkins. And the word collaboration takes on a whole new meaning in their work. I've been very, very privileged to have seen this collaboration in process towards the end of Eric's life. And have been fascinated by the whole idea of how music and dance comes together. In working with Lucia and with Eric, I've learned a great deal about these two things. And in thinking about today, what Lucia might talk to us about, I thought that we could focus a little bit, perhaps in the past, on some of the work that she's doing with Eric. But also, we are at a point, it so happens that Lucia is in the middle of a commission that is to be premiered in a month with the White Oak Project with Mikhail Baryshnikov dancing solo at Eric's final work. And Lucia is writing the score. And without revealing too much about the process, I thought that I would ask you a little bit about how these things come together, how music and dance comes together. About 2 years ago, a wonderful New York painter named John Phillips did a series on Lucia entitled Lucia in the Barn. John has a country home in upstate New York, and Lucia and Eric were up there for about a week, I think, at the time. Sorry, is this correct? Yeah. And John did a series
when they were on the brink of discoveries. Well, how can I write that down? And already the door has slammed. And finally I said, well, hell, I'll figure out a way to write it down, something, but I'm not going to give up on that sound. I don't know if that's making any sense. But so as I say, and then I was very fortunate in making friends with a wonderful American philosopher named S.E. Northrop, who had the Sterling Chair of Philosophy at Yale and was a protege of Whitehead. In fact, wrote one of the most wonderful essays on Whitehead that's affected, again, my composing. And that is when he talked about what Whitehead called the fallacy, it's a mouthful, but I'll say it, the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And the whole theory is that our ordinary mind is always thinking practically, and it seems as if we're experiencing directly, but we're not. The easiest way I have for explaining it, and it absolutely thrills me, is, Zen Buddhism got to be quite a cult. And so everybody knows the word koan by now. There's no one here who doesn't know what the word koan means. Well, it is the conundrum or the absurd shock that the Zen master throws at his novice to shake him up into enlightenment. And, well, some of you are, I don't know if there are people old enough here who love J.D. Salinger, but I love him. Well, remember he talked about the sound of one hand clapping? All right. What do you think that means? It got to be such a cult that it began to be like a series of jokes, but they're not jokes. What they are taking something that we take for granted, and they're constant, and then we live by them. But in the meantime, we're not living. And so the whole idea about enlightenment, as I understand that's not what I ought to do now since you have a very short schedule, but I just thought to throw it out. Yeah.
You said you don't believe in improvisation, but it's just.
Yeah. What did I say?
Because you are a performer, and I've heard you often enough to know that you change from performance to performance.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Why is it that you feel that
No.
improvisation is
There's
the way
nothing,
to...
no, I'm sorry, I said it too categorically. There's nothing wrong with improvisation, it's just that I think we should be very aware that as we improvise, that it's only like 1% of the time does that flash come out, and the rest is just all the cliches we always have. But there's some people who think that those cliches are the great thing, that's all. No. No, actually, there's no composer alive who doesn't compose ultimately in what you call improvisation. But wasn't it Joan this morning who said that critical sense has to be very important? You have to know which part to throw out and then keep that